Tunisia, February 1943. Under a cold desert dawn, smoke still drifts across the battlefield near Kasserine Pass. The sand is littered with twisted metal, tracks half buried in the dust, and the distant hum of recovery vehicles echoes through the hills. In a makeshift German testing yard, a captured American M4A1 Sherman sits beneath the glare of floodlights. Its olive paint is scorched, its sides scarred by shrapnel, yet the machine still looks strangely alive. Its turret smooth, its armor uncracked, its engine silent but ready. A group of Wehrmacht engineers and ordnance officers circle the tank. Clipboards in hand, they measure, tap, and peer through the periscopes. One man tests the turret's traverse. The mechanism hums, smooth and precise, faster than anything they've seen. Another opens the engine hatch and freezes. Inside, space, accessibility, logic. They exchange quiet, uneasy glances. This is no crude mass-production toy. It is a soldier's machine. Simple, efficient, terrifyingly practical. As the first report is written, a single thought runs unspoken through the group. If they can build this in such numbers, how can we ever keep up? The story of the Sherman tank begins not on the battlefield, but in the design offices of Detroit and Washington, years before its thunder first rolled across North Africa. In the late 1930s, as Europe slid toward war, the United States watched from a distance, cautious, unready, and still scarred by the memory of the Great War. Its armored forces were small, scattered among cavalry divisions that still trained with horses. Tanks were viewed as support vehicles, not independent weapons. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, then France in 1940, American observers saw something they could scarcely ignore: the Blitzkrieg. Coordinated columns of tanks, infantry, and aircraft moved with precision and purpose, tearing through fixed defenses. The lesson was immediate and brutal. Tanks were no longer auxiliaries. They were decisive instruments of strategy. American engineers and ordnance officers took note. They began designing a new tank not as a prototype of perfection, but as a mass-producible, reliable, adaptable weapon. One that could be built in the tens of thousands, repaired easily in the field, and modified as war demanded. The result of that thinking was the M4 Sherman. Its ancestor, the M3 Lee, had been a stopgap, an ungainly hybrid with a side-mounted 75mm gun that forced the entire hull to turn for every shot. It was effective enough in 1941, but awkward and outdated almost as soon as it entered combat. American engineers learned quickly. The gun would have to be placed in a fully rotating turret, the crew layout simplified, the engine standardized, and the weight balanced for both transport and production. The first prototype of the M4 was completed by Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1941. It bore a new rounded cast hull, a powerful Continental R975 radial engine, and a 75mm gun mounted in a power-driven turret. Within months, contracts were signed across the country. The United States did not have time for perfect designs. It needed dependable ones, and it needed them fast. Factories that once built cars and locomotives retooled overnight. Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, Pressed Steel Car Company all joined the effort. Henry Ford's engineers turned mass production into an art form. Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal tank plant, designed by industrial architect Albert Kahn, became the beating heart of America's armored industry. When the first Shermans arrived in North Africa in late 1942, they were greeted by skepticism from friend and foe alike. British tank crews, bloodied in desert campaigns against the Afrika Korps, were cautious. The Germans dismissed the Sherman as just another foreign copy of their Panzer IV. Then came the battles at El Gueter and Kasserine Pass. For the first time, the Americans fought the Wehrmacht head-on. The Sherman proved itself. Not indestructible, but dependable. Its 75mm gun could pierce German armor at medium range, and though its own armor was vulnerable to the long-barreled Panzer IV and Tiger, it had one advantage no German tank could match. It worked. It started in the morning. It traversed smoothly. It had radios in every vehicle. Crews could repair it with wrenches and spare parts, not miracles. To German officers accustomed to temperamental transmissions, oil leaks, and delicate optics, this was astonishing. The Sherman might not have been the best tank in any single category. Not the thickest, not the most powerful, not the lowest silhouette. But it was good enough in every way that mattered, and built in numbers no other nation could rival. By early 1943, when German engineers finally examined a captured M4A1 near Kasserine, they were looking not at an isolated machine, but at the embodiment of an industrial philosophy: efficiency over elegance, speed over subtlety, reliability over refinement. In the coming months, as their reports reached Berlin, that realization would unsettle even the most confident minds in the German war industry. For in the Sherman, they saw something more dangerous than a weapon. They saw the reflection of a nation that had turned production itself into strategy. When German engineers first stood beside the captured M4A1 Sherman in Tunisia in early 1943, they did not see an enemy marvel. They saw a puzzle. The tank seemed, by their standards, ordinary. Its cast hull looked rough, the welds wide and industrial. The suspension was simple. Vertical volet springs, not the complex torsion bars of the Panzer IV or Tiger. Even the gun, a 75mm M3, appeared unremarkable on paper. Yet the longer they studied it, the less ordinary it became. At the Wehrmacht's Technical Testing Center in Kummersdorf, where the captured Sherman was later sent, engineers methodically disassembled it piece by piece. They began to see something that contradicted every instinct of German engineering. Nothing on this tank was over-designed. Every component, from the gun stabilizer to the gearbox, served a purpose without excess. It was functional simplicity, and it was revolutionary. German reports described the first impression with restrained astonishment. The hydraulic turret traverse system, powered by an electric motor, allowed the gunner to swing the turret a full rotation in seconds. In German tanks, the same action required strenuous hand cranking. This single mechanism changed how the Sherman could fight. It could react faster, track targets on the move, and fire accurately while repositioning. Then there was the gun stabilizer, a compact gyroscopic system allowing limited accuracy while moving, not perfect, but decades ahead of anything fielded by the Germans at the time. It was an engineering gamble, simple enough for mass production, sophisticated enough to give American crews a decisive edge. The crew ergonomics shocked the examiners most. The interior was spacious by German standards, designed for efficiency under stress. Every lever, periscope, and radio was positioned with human use in mind. German tanks, though formidable, were cramped and fatiguing to operate. In contrast, the Sherman felt human-centered. Then came the radios. Every American tank, without exception, carried one. German Panzer units, even by 1943, often equipped only platoon leaders with radios, leaving the rest to rely on flags or shouted commands. In the Sherman, coordination was instant. A company of tanks could move and fight as a single organism. To the German evaluators, this was unnerving. Their own machines were masterpieces of precision, but they required expert crews, specialized parts, and constant maintenance. The Sherman seemed to invite use. Its engine started reliably, its components were accessible, and its systems could be repaired in the field by mechanics with minimal tools. Even its production philosophy was alien. Where German tank factories assembled limited numbers of complex vehicles by hand, the Americans had transformed tank building into an industrial flow. The Sherman was built in 10 major plants, each producing interchangeable parts. A component from a Ford-built M4A3 could fit seamlessly into a Baldwin-built M4A1. For Germany, whose tanks were often handcrafted and incompatible across models, this concept was almost unthinkable. The engineers' final assessment, later circulated among Wehrmacht ordnance units, was blunt. This vehicle is not superior by design. It is superior by conception. It is made to be produced and repaired faster than it can be destroyed. On the battlefield, those words proved prophetic. The Sherman was rarely alone. When one was disabled, recovery vehicles or other tanks hauled it back. When one burned, replacements arrived within weeks. Crews rotated, trained, retrained, and returned. The Germans could destroy tanks, but not the system that produced them. By the time those first evaluations reached Berlin, German high command was already struggling to meet Hitler's demands for new models, the Panther and Tiger. They were magnificent on paper, monstrous in power, and terrifying in silhouette. But they came at a cost. Each one required more man-hours to build than 5 Shermans. Each breakdown drained resources. The German engineers understood the dilemma. Their craftsmanship was unsurpassed, but it had become a trap. Against the Sherman, they were not just fighting American soldiers. They were fighting the entire American industrial machine, and that machine was just getting started. The captured tank had revealed more than its armor, thickness, or gun performance. It had revealed an idea that war in the modern age would not be won by perfection, but by production. And soon, in the hedgerows of France and the ruins of Germany itself, that truth would burn into history. Inside every Sherman tank, there were 5 men, each with a role, each depending entirely on the other. Commander, gunner, loader, driver, assistant driver. In such tight quarters, hierarchy disappeared. The machine became an organism, and the crew, its heartbeat. The Americans who manned these tanks were not elite aristocrats or long-trained specialists like their German counterparts. Many were farmers, factory workers, or students from small towns who had learned armored warfare in mere months. But what they lacked in pedigree, they made up for in familiarity, because the Sherman, by design, was made for them. Its controls felt natural. Levers and gauges resembled those of tractors or trucks. The engine responded like a car's, the steering clutch intuitive. Crews trained on one Sherman could climb into another without hesitation, no matter which factory had built it. What they valued most was reliability. A Sherman started when you needed it to. Its transmission didn't seize in mud, its parts rarely failed for want of oil, and its radio always worked. For crews who lived and fought inside these machines, that dependability was more valuable than another inch of armor. The Germans respected that. Their tanks were deadly but demanding, over-engineered, temperamental, and unforgiving of mechanical error. A Tiger could dominate a battlefield, but only if it arrived. A Sherman might not match its firepower, but it would always arrive. Crews came to trust the tank as they would a comrade. They gave their machines names: Battling Bessie, Thunderbolt, Audrey. They painted slogans on their hulls, tucked photos behind instruments, and treated the engine's hum as a sign that life still held its rhythm. The human story of the Sherman was not of heroism in isolation, but endurance in unity. Men who survived not because they had the best tank, but because they had one that never stopped moving. What German engineers found inside that captured Sherman was not technological brilliance in isolation, but technology aligned with doctrine. The Americans had designed their tank around a simple principle: the combined arms concept. A tank didn't fight alone. It fought with infantry, artillery, air support, and logistics at its back. Every Sherman had a radio to maintain that connection. Every feature served that greater purpose. Its hydraulic turret traverse system, for instance, could rotate 360 degrees in seconds. This meant faster reaction times, a crucial advantage in the unpredictable chaos of close combat. While a German gunner struggled with hand cranks to align his weapon, a Sherman gunner could already be firing. Then there was the gun stabilizer, a gyroscopic device that allowed the main gun to maintain rough aim even while the tank was moving. It wasn't precise enough for pinpoint accuracy, but it let crews fire first, forcing enemy tanks to take cover. To the Germans, the concept seemed too complicated for field use, yet the Americans had made it simple enough for mass training. The Sherman's vertical volute spring suspension, VVSS, also defied expectations. It was easy to produce, easy to repair, and good enough for most terrain. German tanks used advanced torsion bars, smoother in motion, but time-consuming to replace. The Sherman's system could be repaired on the front lines with wrenches and spare springs. Even its flaws were instructive. The Sherman's high profile made it an easier target, but it also gave the crew better visibility and internal space. Its 75mm gun wasn't designed to duel tanks. It was a general-purpose weapon optimized for infantry support. That reflected American doctrine. Tanks were part of a system, not dueling champions. When the Germans disassembled the Sherman, they didn't just see innovation, they saw intention. Every decision had been guided by practicality. In Germany, tanks were designed by engineers. In America, tanks were designed by logistics officers. And that difference, though invisible in blueprints, would decide the war. When the first Sherman was examined in detail at Kummersdorf and later at Erlangen, the German evaluators couldn't help but admire and resent what they saw. It was not that the American tank was technically superior. It was that it embodied an approach utterly opposite to their own. German tank design prized precision, craftsmanship, and performance. Each model, the Panzer IV, Panther, Tiger, represented a pursuit of mechanical excellence. Every bolt was meticulously placed, every plate machined to tolerance. But that very perfection came at a cost: complexity, fragility, and long production times. The Sherman, by contrast, was blunt, efficient, and brutally logical. The Germans found that the hull could be cast or welded depending on which factory built it, a sign of design flexibility, not weakness. The same tank could use 3 different engines depending on supply. To the German mind, that was chaos. To the American, it was adaptability. And then there was the turret drive. Fast, responsive, electrically powered. German engineers tested its speed against their own Panzer Y4 Traverse systems and noted the difference with surprise. In combat, a second or two meant survival. In the Sherman, that second belonged to the crew. One report concluded, American design prioritizes quantity and reliability over technical superiority. Yet, in prolonged conflict, such philosophy may prove decisive. They were right. To the Wehrmacht's officers in the field, that captured Sherman was more than an enemy tank. It was a warning. For every one they destroyed, several more appeared. For every model they improved, the Americans built thousands. By 1944, when German divisions faced Shermans in Normandy, they were no longer surprised. They were overwhelmed. To understand the Sherman is to understand the United States in wartime, a nation that transformed its factories into the engines of global strategy. When President Roosevelt promised to make America the arsenal of democracy, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced more than 49,000 Sherman tanks, alongside 100,000 aircraft and 2.5 million military trucks. The Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant, designed by architect Albert Kahn, could build a new tank every hour by 1943. Assembly lines, once devoted to cars, now forged armor plates, engines, and turrets. Each plant specialized, yet every part remained interchangeable. A marvel of industrial coordination. To the Germans, This was the most terrifying revelation of all. Their own production, decentralized and disrupted by Allied bombing, struggled to build 1,300 Panthers in an entire year. The Americans built 10 times that number of Shermans and shipped them halfway around the world. The engineers who inspected the captured M4A1 wrote as much in their report. The enemy's strength is not in the tank itself, but in the speed with which it can be replaced. This realization pierced through German industrial confidence. The Sherman's efficiency was not just mechanical, it was systemic. Its parts were designed for easy transport, easy replacement, and easy repair. Factories built components that fit perfectly regardless of origin. Trains carried them to ports. Ships carried them to the front. Mechanics assembled them in days. It was warfare turned into manufacturing, and when the Germans compared it to their own system, where a single Panther engine required days of hand-fitting and testing, the gap became more than technical. It was philosophical. For the Americans, the Sherman was never about dominance. It was about delivery. It didn't promise invincibility, only dependability. Its crews knew its strengths and its limits. They respected German armor, but trusted their own endurance. When one tank was lost, the next rolled up behind it. When an engine failed, a replacement was already en route. To the German engineers who studied the captured Sherman, this attitude was unsettling. They had spent years perfecting machines meant to embody national pride, symbols of mechanical superiority. But the Sherman was humble, unglamorous, and yet far more effective in sustaining a war of attrition. It reflected the American mindset itself, pragmatic, collective, relentless. A tank that worked over and over until the war was done. The captured Sherman in Tunisia was the beginning of a revelation. What the Germans saw that day was not just a foreign tank. They saw the future of warfare, industrial, organized, efficient, and human-centered. Soon, they would meet that future again, not in testing yards, but on the battlefields of France, where hundreds of Shermans would roll through fire and hedgerows, proving once and for all that practicality could triumph over perfection. The morning fog lifts over the hedgerows of northern France. The beaches have fallen silent except for the thud of artillery and the low rumble of engines moving inland. Along the narrow lanes, through shattered stone villages and flooded fields, hundreds of Sherman tanks crawl forward, olive drab against the gray dawn. The Americans have landed. Now, they must break out. What began in the desert of Tunisia now unfolds on the European mainland. Against them waits the full weight of the Wehrmacht. Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Tigers. Their long 75mm and 88mm guns hidden among hedges and barns. To German commanders, the Sherman is still a familiar sight. A soft target, lightly armored and easily burned. But what they have yet to grasp is how many there are, and how swiftly they adapt. In the first days after D-Day, the fighting around Carentan, Saint-Lô, and Caumont-Levante reveals the brutal truth of the new battlefield. German ambushes are deadly. Shermans burst into flame from single high-velocity hits. American crews learn quickly. They cannot duel Panthers head-on. They must outmaneuver them, and they do. Within weeks, American engineers and field workshops, often just miles behind the front, begin fitting improvised Kulin hedge cutters, welded from scrap steel and beach obstacles, to the front of their tanks. The devices allow Shermans to punch straight through dense hedgerows, flanking German positions once thought impassable. In one of the war's most remarkable examples of rapid adaptation, this field innovation spreads across entire divisions in days. German reports, intercepted later, note disbelief. The Americans move through the hedgerows like ghosts. Their tanks appear where no tank should. The tide begins to shift. What the Germans fail to understand is that the Sherman is not a single weapon. it's an evolving platform. By June 1944, new variants like the M4A3 76W are arriving in Europe. Isarandu Tiders, featuring a high-velocity 70-theater 6-meter gun and wet stowage ammunition racks that drastically reduce the risk of internal explosions. The tanks burn less often. Crews survive more. And there are thousands of them. Everywhere the Germans fight. The same scene repeats. A Panther fires from concealment, striking one Sherman, but before it can reload, 3 more open fire from different angles. A Tiger immobilizes 2 at long range, but within minutes, Allied artillery zeroes in, and the heavy tank is smothered in shells. The Shermans are not superior in a single duel. They are unrelenting in the swarm. In one engagement outside St. Lo, a German commander radios in frustration. They come like waves. When one burns, another takes its place. Their radios talk faster than we can shoot. The same qualities that had once puzzled German engineers now manifest in battle. Reliability, mobility, and coordination. A Panther can destroy a Sherman in seconds, but only if it reaches the battlefield intact, fueled, and supplied. The Sherman, by contrast, is everywhere, fueled, maintained, and replaced by an army of mechanics, drivers, and logistics officers that move like clockwork. German recovery crews labor to repair their precious tanks for days. American crews repair theirs in hours. A Panther's engine can overheat in 30 minutes of rough terrain. A Sherman can run all day. A Tiger can barely cross a bridge. A Sherman can drive through one. The cumulative effect is devastating. The more the Wehrmacht fights, the more it bleeds resources it cannot replace. By July 1944, the Germans begin to realize that the war of armor is no longer about superiority. It's about sustainability. Each captured Sherman studied in the field now carries not contempt, but respect. German Panzer engineers record in their reports, its armor is thin, but its system is formidable. The enemy's machines are always in motion. The tank is but one part of an organism we cannot match. That organism, the combined might of American industry, logistics, and doctrine, has now taken physical form across the fields of Normandy. For the German soldier facing wave after wave of Shermans, the shock is not just tactical, it is existential. They are no longer fighting another army. They are fighting a nation that has turned war into production, movement, and method. And as the fog burns away over the hedgerows, that realization settles like dust in the air. Heavy, final, undeniable. The tank they once dismissed as crude and simple has become the hammer of liberation. The captured machine they studied in Tunisia was only the first note in a song of iron that now plays across Europe. One measured not in perfection, but in persistence. The mist clings low to the fields. It is dawn again, and once more the earth trembles under the weight of engines. Across the rolling farmland near Aracourt, the 4th Armored Division of General George S. Patton's 3rd Army braces for battle. Through the fog, German panzers advance, not the old Panzer IVs now, but the feared Panthers of the 111th Panzer Brigade. Their long 75mm guns and thick, sloped armor make them the deadliest tanks Germany has ever produced. On paper, the Americans should be outmatched. But in the haze of that September morning, the war's arithmetic changes again. The first contact comes at 800 hours. Visibility: less than 300 yards. Sherman crews peer through periscopes, silhouettes barely visible through the fog. Radio chatter crackles, short, clipped, disciplined. The Germans, lacking that coordination, advance blind, their formation spreading unevenly. The first Panther emerges over a ridge, enormous, silent, and unaware. A Sherman commander spots it first, relaying its position instantly. 3 tanks pivot at once. Turrets swing in unison. 3 shells fly, 2 miss. The third strikes the Panther's flank. A lucky hit, but enough. Smoke bursts from its rear deck as it grinds to a halt. Moments later, artillery joins in, American spotters on nearby hills calling coordinates by radio. Within minutes, German tanks are bracketed by indirect fire, something their doctrine was never built to counter. The Battle of Arras-Court has begun. For 4 days, the fog-shrouded fields of Lorraine become a proving ground, not just of machines, but of methods. The Panthers possess superior guns and armor, but they are isolated, moving without air cover or unified command. The Shermans, lighter and faster, strike in coordinated groups, their movements guided by constant communication between tank commanders, artillery batteries, and reconnaissance aircraft. The result is chaos for the Germans. Every time a Panther breaks through, it finds itself alone, surrounded by smaller, quicker Shermans that dart from cover, fire, and fade. The Americans exploit every advantage the Sherman offers: its 360-degree traverse, its dependable engine, its quick acceleration. The Panther's 75mm gun can destroy a Sherman at a mile's distance. But in Lorraine, there are no long fields, only fog and hedgerows. At 300 yards, the difference in armor means little. Skill, nerve, and communication decide the outcome. By the third day, German officers begin to panic. Radio discipline breaks down. Orders contradict. American tank commanders, by contrast, act on shared doctrine, flexible, decentralized, confident in one another. They are not relying on a perfect machine. They are relying on a perfect system. At noon on the 4th day, the sun finally burns through the fog. What it reveals is astonishing. Smoking hulks of Panthers scattered across the hills, more than 80 destroyed or abandoned. The 4th Armored Division has lost just 25 Shermans. For the German survivors, the experience is haunting. Their tanks were technically superior, but they were fighting the wrong war. The Sherman had turned the tide not by outgunning, but by outlasting, outmaneuvering, and outnumbering. Later, German engineers would again study wrecked Shermans captured at Arras-Court. Their findings would echo those written the year before in Tunisia. This vehicle is not exceptional individually, but as part of a system, it is invincible. From that point onward, the Sherman's reputation shifted from adequate to essential. In Patton's armored spearheads, in the breakout from Normandy, in the advance across France, and later across the Rhine, the Sherman became the defining machine of Allied momentum. Every time one fell, another rolled off a ship in Cherbourg or Antwerp. Every time a crew was lost, another was trained and ready. The Germans could not understand how the Americans sustained such rhythm. They still viewed the war as a test of superiority. The Americans viewed it as a test of supply. The battle reports from Lorraine became case studies in military academies after the war. Analysts noted that even in engagements where German tanks achieved a 3-to-1 kill ratio, they still lost the war of numbers within weeks. Because while a Panther required 150,000 man-hours to build, a Sherman needed less than 30,000. The Americans could replace their losses 5 times faster and maintain every one of them in the field. By late 1944, Germany's engineers understood the truth that their armies had lived and died, proving the battlefield no longer belonged to the best machine, it belonged to the best system of machines, and nowhere was that truth more visible than in the Sherman, a tank that, by design, made its own obsolescence impossible, because it could always be repaired, upgraded, or replaced. As the last gunfire fades over Lorraine, the surviving German commanders retreat westward, shaken and silent. The fog, now rising in the sun, reveals a landscape littered with steel, the remnants of perfection defeated by practicality. The men who once studied the captured Sherman in Tunisia could never have imagined this ending. They had seen a tank. They had not seen the civilization that built it. By winter 1944, the pattern of war was unmistakable. Wherever the Sherman appeared, the German line thinned. Wherever it multiplied, resistance collapsed. The tide that had once carried the Wehrmacht across Europe was now turning against it, not through superior tactics or singular weapons, but through endurance. America's tanks, ships, and planes seemed to emerge endlessly from the horizon, their numbers undiminished even after the fiercest battles. The Sherman had become more than a tank. It was a symbol of a nation's ability to wage industrial warfare. German intelligence officers, analyzing reports from the front, admitted what their engineers had seen the year before. The Americans have achieved in production what we sought through innovation. They do not perfect one tank, they perfect a system. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, that system was tested one last time. German forces struck hard through the Ardennes, catching the Allies by surprise. Snow covered the forests, and temperatures dropped below freezing. Panzer divisions, including Tigers and Panthers, spearheaded the assault. For weeks, the outcome hung in the balance. The snow-muffled engines and the narrow roads turned to ice. German armor carved deep into Allied lines. But when the weather cleared, the pattern repeated itself. The Shermans came by road, by rail, by sheer determination. In one of the largest logistical efforts of the war, Patton's Third Army executed a 90-degree turn north, driving 100 miles through snow in just 3 days. Hundreds of Shermans rolled through the blizzard, their engines fitted with makeshift heaters, their crews sleepless but resolute. German units, their fuel supplies exhausted, began abandoning tanks by the roadside. Many of their prized Panthers froze where they stood. Engines seized, transmissions cracked. The Shermans kept moving. That was the essence of the machine, and of the army that built it. When it was cold, it started. When it broke, it was repaired. When it was destroyed, it was replaced. By January 1945, the Bulge was sealed, and the Germans were in retreat. The battle had cost the Allies dearly, but the lesson was clear. Mobility beats might. The Sherman didn't have to be the best, only there, ready, and in numbers. In the months that followed, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced toward Berlin, the roads were lined with the evidence of that truth. Burned-out Panthers and Tigers lay by the dozens, mechanical marvels rendered useless by lack of parts, fuel, and time. For every German tank that could fight, the Americans fielded 5. Captured German officers began to speak of a new kind of warfare, one they could not match. "We fought craftsmen," one said after the war. "You fought with factories." Even Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, one of Germany's most experienced commanders, remarked in frustration, "Our soldiers fought bravely." But bravery cannot replace fuel and replacement parts. By then, even the German High Command had accepted that the Sherman's true power was not its gun or armor, but its availability. It was never meant to dominate, only to endure, and by 1945, endurance had become victory. When Germany finally collapsed in May 1945, the roads to Berlin were lined with proof of a war decided not by perfection, but by production. The Sherman tank, once dismissed as average, had become the most consequential armored vehicle of the Second World War. Nearly 50,000 had been built, serving on every front, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen forests of Belgium, and across the shattered bridges of the Rhine. To the German engineers who had once examined a single captured Sherman in Tunisia, the sight was almost poetic. The same machine, replicated tens of thousands of times, advancing in columns that seemed endless. The inferior tank had outlasted their finest creations. In the ruins of Kummersdorf, where the first captured M4A1 had been studied in 1943, surviving records now told a bitter truth. It is not possible, one report read, to design a tank superior to a nation that can build without limit. That single line captured the transformation of warfare. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank. Not even close. The German Tiger I had thicker armor, the Panther had greater range, and the King Tiger was a fortress on tracks. But each of those machines represented scarcity, a weapon that could not be replaced as fast as it was lost. The Sherman represented abundance, the weaponization of efficiency itself. After the war, the numbers told the story. For every Tiger produced, the United States had built nearly 200 Shermans. For every German Panzer factory, America had mobilized entire cities. Factories like Detroit Arsenal, Pressed Steel Car Company, and Fisher Body had turned tank production into science. They created what German planners could never duplicate: interchangeability. A transmission from one Sherman fit another. A turret from another bolted seamlessly into place. This industrial consistency meant the Sherman could evolve. By 1945, it had been fitted with new 76mm guns, HVSS suspensions, wet ammunition storage, and flamethrower variants for clearing bunkers. It even served as the chassis for specialized vehicles, bridge layers, recovery tanks, and self-propelled artillery. No other tank in the war could match its adaptability. And when American troops advanced into Germany, they found that even in defeat, their enemy respected it. Abandoned Panthers bore bullet scars, but little hate graffiti. Some German mechanics even left notes of grudging admiration inside captured Shermans. Good machine, always runs. The Allies' victory in Europe had many fathers: courage, logistics, leadership. But the Sherman stood at the crossroads of them all. It carried infantry through cities, supported breakthroughs, ferried supplies, and gave commanders a weapon they could rely on day after day. When the B-17 Flying Fortress ruled the skies and the Liberty ships ruled the sea, the Sherman ruled the ground. It became a universal symbol of America's war-making philosophy. Not the pursuit of the perfect, but the mastery of the possible. Even in post-war Germany, as engineers rebuilt their factories, the lesson lingered. The new generation of designers studied the Sherman's balance, its simplicity, its maintainability, its logistics-first approach, and found in it the blueprint for the mechanized age. Decades later, historians would argue endlessly about whether the Sherman was a good tank, but those who fought in it knew better. It was good enough, and that was its genius. In 1943, German engineers had examined one Sherman and felt a quiet unease. In 1945, that unease had become prophecy. The war had shown that genius could design great machines, but only a united nation could build enough of them to win. The Sherman was the proof, a tank forged not for glory, but for victory. The war ended, but the hum of the Sherman's engine did not fade easily. For the men who built it, drove it, and fought from within its steel walls, it had become more than a weapon. It was a companion, a lifeline, and a reflection of the country that created it. Even decades later, when veterans spoke of the Sherman, their words carried a kind of respect that transcended nostalgia. It wasn't about the gun, or the armor, or the statistics. It was about trust. Trust that when you turned the starter, the engine would fire. That when the shell came, the turret would turn. That when the battle raged, the tank beside you would be there. In that sense, the Sherman was never designed to be the best tank in the world. It was designed to bring its crew home. What had shocked the German engineers back in Tunisia was not technological magic. It was clarity of purpose. They had seen a nation that understood war as an act of organization, not art. A tank built not for prestige, but for persistence. A machine that proved that simplicity, multiplied 1,000 times over, becomes strength. In every battle it fought, the Sherman carried that idea forward. From Africa's deserts to Europe's fields, it moved with a rhythm that no enemy could disrupt. The rhythm of a nation that refused to stop building, moving, and adapting. When the last of them was retired, rusting quietly in post-war depots or paraded in victory columns, the world had already changed. Warfare would never again belong to craftsmanship alone. It would belong to systems, to production, to logistics, to cooperation. And so the Sherman endures, not as a symbol of perfection, but as the embodiment of something greater. The moment when industrial genius met human resilience, and together they rolled across history.